But first, for all the Conservative Party's divisions over Brexit, Labour has some difficulties of its own. The fundamental problem of having a pro-EU membership that many voters who backed Leave has left the party walking a delicate tightrope, which is increasingly looking like it could snap, and the time for choosing a side is fast approaching. Well, to talk about that and lots more, we're joined now by Jeremy Corbyn. Thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we finally know what the government's plan for Brexit looks like. So is that something that the Labour Party could support?
No, we can't support it. It doesn't meet our tests. We don't believe it meets the needs of the country. We do think it would be much better if the Labour alternative of access to a market, a guaranteed permanent form of customs union with the European Union and protection of rights in this country would be a better deal for this country as a whole.
So what specifically is it in the text that doesn't meet those tests that you disagree with?
Well, a number of things that are in this agreement that are simply not acceptable. One is that the issue of Northern Ireland is not dealt with because it will mean that there will be a border down the Irish Sea unless an agreement is reached within 2 years.
But how do you plan to solve that yourself?
Well, you have an agreement with the European Union for a customs union for the whole of the UK. That has to be the basis for it.
That is the backstop, though, isn't it?
Well, but we have no say in that until such time as a backstop has been agreed, and during that period the EU calls all the shots and the EU decides whether we're allowed to change that arrangement or not. It's a one-way agreement. It's quite risky.
The issue, of course, is that you know, I know how critical the moment is. I understand that you have concerns, such as whether or not we can leave the backstop unilaterally. But are those concerns big enough that you're risking no deal? Because that's the reality of your position, isn't it?
No, it's not the reality at all. We would say we'll vote against this deal because it doesn't meet our test. We do not believe it serves the interests of this country. Therefore, the government would have to go back to the EU and renegotiate rapidly. They've had, after all, since the referendum of 2016 to undertake serious negotiations, and here we are now 131 days to go, and they're finally presenting something to Parliament. It's not a very acceptable way of running things.
But you know, don't you, that the likelihood of no deal increases if you don't support this deal? And we can just have a look at what you've said previously about the risk of no deal. You've said that if we vote against that, if we don't have a Brexit deal, that would be a national disaster. So are you risking a national disaster?
Not at all. We're saying now to the government, you haven't got a majority in Parliament for this, you don't have a majority support in the whole country, you have to go back and do something better. Indeed, there are already the Prime Minister's outriders in her own cabinet who are saying, well, actually, we'll have to go and negotiate something else.
So what specifically do you want? So if, for example, you were talking there about being able to unilaterally leave the backstop, if that was something that the government could negotiate, would you then support it?
What I would say to the government is you've got to get in place a permanent customs arrangement with the European Union. Otherwise, we lose on jobs, we lose on investment, and we lose on future economic development.
So it's a future relationship that you want to see.
Indeed, there's that. But they've also got to be very, very clear about rights and objectives. Put it two ways. One is the government has embraced without any question whatsoever EU rules on state aid. It hasn't embraced without any question the issue of workers' rights. If European workers' rights improve, ours can deteriorate at the same time. What I want to see is absolutely an alignment with Europe on workers' rights, or we go further than that. The danger is that we end up with the movement, which many on the Tory right want, which is a deregulated economy moving further and further away from what is our major trading partner, Europe.
So if you have I'm just trying to really pin you down on exactly what it would be that gets you over the line and to support the deal, because I'm still slightly unclear on what exactly it is that would mean you'd come back and say, OK, Prime Minister, we'll support.
There's 500 pages in this document, much of which are actually quite vague. Where's the guarantee on environmental protections? Where's the guarantee on consumer protections? Where's the guarantee on workers' rights? Where's the guarantee on trade?
But there are some guarantees. There are the level playing field commitments, for example.
Think of all those people working in manufacturing industry in Britain and those thousands of jobs in supply chains all across the Midlands and the North who will be very worried that their companies are going to either disinvest or not invest in the future, and we'll see a continuing rundown of our manufacturing industry. What we want is an expanding economy and a fairer economy.
The level playing field commitments are in that withdrawal agreement. Have you read the 500 pages?
I've read a lot of it, not every last word. I've read many summaries and many other analyses, as I'm sure you have as well.
So just to really try and clarify then, so is there anything you can say specifically that if Theresa May comes back with these points, you will vote for the deal?
We've put it to the government many, many times. I believe there is a majority in Parliament that would support a permanent customs arrangement with the European Union. I believe there is a majority in Parliament that would want to see a guarantee of rights on both sides of the Channel. And there's absolutely a majority in Parliament that does not want to see a deal that brings in effect, a financial border across the Irish Sea.
Mr Corbyn, can Brexit be stopped?
As of this moment, the arithmetic in Parliament is such that Brexit has been triggered, Article 50. We voted for Article 50 in order to give respect to the referendum. And I was asked this question by Der Spiegel. What I said was, we couldn't stop it because we don't have the votes in Parliament to do so. What I want to do is say to the government, you've had all this time to negotiate. You're not going to get this thing through Parliament. Don't waste another 2 weeks on this. Go back now, because you must have read the runes in Parliament. You can't get it through. I
just want to go back to this point and get some real clarity on it. We can have a look at what you said in the interview that you mentioned. When you asked about Brexit, you said, we can't stop it. Your Brexit secretary then said, Brexit can be stopped. So who's right? Because I'm a bit confused.
Well, I said, we can't stop it, because on our own, obviously, we can't. Keir said, Brexit can be stopped. Clearly, a vast majority of people could if they all agreed to do so. But the point I'm making is...
You say that you can't stop Brexit, but
on
at the
our
same
own.
time, if Labour swung behind the campaign for a people's vote, there would be
well, the people's vote is a second question, isn't it, actually? The issue is there was a referendum in 2016. A majority voted to leave the EU. There are many reasons why people voted. I don't think you call a referendum and then say you don't like the result, you go away from it. You've got to understand why people voted and try and negotiate the best deal you can. I do not believe this government has negotiated the best deal it can. All options are on the table in the future.
So is no Brexit better than no deal then, in your opinion?
I don't think that's an option we're going to get given. The issue is we're moving up towards the end of March when Britain will be leaving the EU under the current proposals. This government has failed in the negotiations, failed to protect things, and at the same time actually made this country much worse. I mean, this is a week when the UN has condemned Britain for unacceptable levels of poverty. What does that say about this government? What does it say about this country?
At the same time, though, you are the leader of the opposition at this critical moment. Yeah. You have a responsibility to try and drive the debate. It's one thing just to duck out and say, actually, I don't think we're going to be given that option. We don't have the numbers to get it through. But you are in a position where you have a large number of MPs, you have a large number of party members. You could drive the debate if you wanted to.
We are driving a debate about the kind of society we want in Britain. We're driving a debate about the kind of relationship with Europe in the future.
But what about Brexit?
We forced the government onto the whole concept of a transition. We forced them into accepting amendments in Parliament on the meaningful vote at the end of it. Labour has been absolutely on this case ever since the referendum.
Do you think there should be a second referendum? What do you think?
I think it's an option for the future, but it's not an option for today, because if we put a referendum tomorrow, what's it going to be on? What's the question going to be?
What would you like the question to be on? Would you like Remain to be on the ballot paper?
I think that the tests against the government have to be put now, and that's what we're doing. The government must go back and renegotiate and see what it comes back with, and Parliament must look at that time. I think to do anything else now would be to ignore the reality of the situation, is that this government has had all this time to negotiate and hasn't really achieved anything.
I'm keen to talk about your position, though, not just that we know what you think about the government's position, but I'm just keen to examine Labour's position as well. How would you vote if there was a second referendum?
I voted in the first referendum to Remain. I campaigned for Remain and reform. Indeed, I had a debate in this very building to discuss exactly that issue. I think there are reforms needed in the European Union. I think in the future we could have a good, effective relationship with the European Union, which would give us a permanent customs union, which would give us a trade agreement, and above all, would also ensure that we fully cooperate with them on environment and protections.
How would you vote then?
Well, I don't know how I'm going to vote, what the options would be at that time, but I wanted us to remain in the EU. That was my vote in that referendum.
Now, you often say that you want to see a general election. It's very hard to see in many ways how that would happen. Yesterday, your Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, admitted that because of the Fixed Term Parliament Act, it would be very difficult. It's very unlikely, isn't it, that we're going to get a general election? Can you admit that now?
No, it's not unlikely at all. This government cannot control Parliament. It doesn't have a majority. The DUP have walked away from their fundamental agreement on the European Union.
So just talk me through how we'd get to a general election.
We could get to a general election if the government resigned and called one. We could get to a general election if 2/3 of MPs voted to have one under the Fixed Term Parliament.
Which is unlikely.
Last time round, nobody expected a general election. The Prime Minister decided to call one because she thought she could win it and do very well. The result was rather different to the one that she expected. I think the country needs stability. It needs an opportunity to have a say on who it wants to conduct the negotiation of the European Union and who it wants to deal with the chronic social issues facing Britain. I mentioned the UN report on poverty. Isn't that pretty damning of our country?
But how you say that it's not unlikely, but that 2/3 of MPs would need to vote for it. So
look,
you
listen,
can't. I mean, you can't really expect the DUP or Conservative MPs to vote to potentially allow you into power, can you?
We will continue to
very optimistic.
We will continue to press the whole issues on Europe and on social justice in Britain. We will continue to demand the British people have a say in who their government should be negotiating these arrangements. I don't believe this government has negotiated fairly or effectively or kept Parliament properly informed of it, and indeed has now come up with an agreement in which we pay a great deal of money and have very little say in anything for the whole of the transition period, and indeed give the EU control over arrangements.
In just 3 months, do you really think you could negotiate a better deal than the government? I mean, is that fantasy politics? It's taken 2 years to get to this point.
The EU is very used to 11th hour stuff. Look at the way the Lisbon Treaty was negotiated, renegotiated and renegotiated again. The issue has to be, you go back to Europe and say, listen, our Parliament doesn't agree with this and doesn't accept it. People of this country don't. There are jobs on both sides of the channel at risk here. We need an agreement, a serious, sensible agreement, and I believe the Labour options are the serious ones that could achieve that.
So just go back to the EU and ask them very nicely if they'd give us a better deal. I mean, it's fantasy, isn't it?
They want an agreement just as much as everybody else does. The problem is this government has not negotiated an effective agreement with them.
So you think you could do it in 3 months?
We would go there straight away, and there is a transition period that's been agreed anyway, so there would be some opportunities there. But of course, you have to go back and say, look, what's been agreed so far between our government and the EU is not acceptable to the British Parliament, or I suspect the British people, and it hasn't yet been tested in the EU Parliament either.
I want to look at your 6 tasks because it's something you mentioned at the beginning of the interview, and it's something that many people just don't think could be possibly achieved by anybody, including yourselves perhaps. Do you really think you'd be able to get a deal that would meet those 6 tests, including one of them, which is that it would deliver the exact same benefits as being in the single market? I mean, how do you get that? Unless you accept free movement of people.
If you have a trade agreement and a customs union with the EU, then you do get the same benefits of trade, you do get the same benefits of the way in which our manufacturing industries
are so benefits as a single market.
Are so inextricably linked. And where did those words come from? The government themselves.
It came from David Davis. It
came from David Davis.
He wasn't even the last Brexit secretary. You can't be saying you were basing
he was the last
policy around...
He was the last but one Brexit secretary.
Well, quite. You're saying you're basing your whole policy on Brexit around the last but one Brexit
quoting back at them what they said, and we believe it to be possible.
But this is more about them playing politics.
By
quoting David Davis's words back. This is very serious stuff.
No. We're very serious about this. We're very serious about our concerns over jobs and investment and trade with the European Union in the future.
The issue that we have, of course, is that you say you want to deliver the exact same benefits of the single market, but that goes against what we've been hearing from Brussels for months. I mean, we can look, for example, can't we, at something that Jean-Claude Juncker, the EU's most senior official, said on this. The deal that will be offered to the UK should not be a deal as advantageous as membership. So I don't understand how you can get the exact same benefits.
Well, that was his view. We have a different view.
So he's wrong, you think?
I don't want to say Yonkers wrong. What I want to say is we believe we could get the same benefits on trade, on customs union with the European Union.
But why would they give you that?
Because it's in the interest of people on both sides of the channel to do so.
But isn't it in their interest to show that you're better off in the EU?
I think it's in their interests to have a very good and close relationship with the countries around the EU, as they are attempting to do with all other neighbouring countries. And I think that is the right way forward.
So why aren't they, in that case, giving the best deal possible to this current government, if it is in their interest as well?
That's a question you have to put to the EU negotiators. I've had many discussions with Michel Barnier, explained what our position is, explained what we would wish to do in government, and explained also that we would not be a government that's trying to look over our shoulders, do sweetheart deals with somebody else, which would result in a lowering of our conditions in this country, workers, consumers and environmental rights. And indeed, President Macron has joined in this yesterday and said he's very concerned about Britain reducing its environmental protection measures. OK.
Now, I'm interested in your own personal journey when it comes to the EU. You know, you voted to leave the European Economic Community in the 1975 referendum. You opposed the creation of the European Union in the Maastricht Treaty. You voted against...
No, I opposed the Maastricht Treaty because it was bringing in an unaccountable central bank and it was moving in the direction of a free market Europe. But
so you opposed
by parallel, I strongly supported the social measures that were brought in by the European Union, which Mrs Thatcher so strongly opposed. So I do support a social Europe. And actually, I've probably spent more time meeting European socialist parties than any other Labour leader ever has.
But it's fair to say that you've had your concerns over the years about the EU and about the European community.
I've had concerns about
I'm interested in your journey. Have you changed your mind? Would you consider yourself to be a Eurosceptic? Where are you at?
I've always been in favour of social cooperation across Europe. I've always been in favour of better workers' rights. I strongly supported the whole social chapter agenda that was brought in the European Union. What I opposed was the development of free market economics in Europe. What I opposed was the state aid rules, which limit to differing extents the ability of a government to intervene on its own economy, like we would want to protect the steel industry, and also have concerns about some of the competition rules, particularly in relation to things like postal services and rail services. So
would you describe yourself as a Eurosceptic?
I would describe myself as a socialist who wants to see social justice in this country and across Europe. And I will be in Lisbon at the beginning of December with fellow socialist parties, making exactly that message and exactly that case. We have to work with people across Europe.
Do you think that the EU should have learned and listened more when it came to the Brexit referendum? Do you think that they've taken the right lessons?
I think a lot of people need to learn from the referendum.
But how about Brussels and the EU?
I think they have actually to some extent, and indeed I've discussed this with Michel Barnier and others. I said, well, actually, the communities we have in Britain that have seen no investment since the end of the miners' strike, that have seen the loss of jobs, that have seen the replacement of good jobs with zero-hours contracts. It's not that different in parts of northern France. It's not that different in parts of eastern Germany. Communities that gain nothing from public investment, nothing from new infrastructure, nothing from any investment in hope for young people, are likely to be against the institutions that they believe have failed to deliver it for them. And I think there's a big lesson for all of us, and that's why it's the third time I've mentioned it. The UN report on poverty in Britain is devastating, devastating of the economic model that we've adopted in this country.
In all your years in Parliament, you probably haven't seen many weeks quite like the one we've just experienced in Westminster. It might be fair to say.
It's been a pretty unusual week. That's very fair to say, yes.
You were called in to see the Prime Minister after she had that cabinet meeting. What happened?
We had a quite short discussion solely about parliamentary process, in which I made the point that I thought Parliament should have sufficient time between the EU Council and any vote in Parliament for members to digest whatever comes out of the EU Council, which of course hasn't yet been held, and our select committees to have a chance to examine it, and that whatever statement or resolution the government put to the House had to be open to amendments. And I sent a letter to the Prime Minister signed by all opposition parties except for the DUP on that.
Was it a cordial meeting?
Yes, it was very short actually.
No cup of tea then?
I had a very nice glass of water, but I was offered a very nice cup of tea or coffee if I wished it. And since I don't drink, I don't know if I was going to be offered drinks or not.
Just to your reflections as well on the week that the Prime Minister has had. She's faced resignations from her cabinet. She's faced no confidence letters from her own MPs. I mean, this is something that you may have a bit of empathy for, because you, of course, have struggled to form a front bench before. You've faced a no confidence motion against you. Do you feel sorry for the Prime Minister?
Well, politics is full of lots of thrills and spills. There is quite a big difference between Labour and Conservative parties in that Labour is largely a member-led organisation, and my mandate came from party members, and I appealed to them in 2016 and gained an increased level of support.
Sorry for that?
I don't do personal attacks and personal abuse, and you notice I've said nothing personal in criticism. I do understand what people go through, and I understand all of that, but I do also understand the responsibility of Parliament and government to deliver for the people that have put us there in the first place. Those people that are struggling with jobs, poverty, mental health, all those issues where we're systematically shortchanging them, they're the people we should be thinking about.
Do you respect the Prime Minister?
I respect all politicians.
OK, Jeremy Corbyn, thank you very much.
Thank you.